You checked it recently, maybe yesterday, maybe this morning, maybe right before you opened this video, without even deciding to. It was just there, the account, the number, sitting in your phone like something waiting to be read. And the number was fine, or it was lower than you expected, or it was exactly where it should be, and yet it still didn't feel like enough. Here's the part nobody says out loud. The number didn't just give you information, it gave you a feeling about yourself. You are not building stability, you are building dependency. A strong number and something in your chest settled, a soft number and something quietly tightened. Not financial concern exactly, older than that, closer to something that lived in you long before you ever had a balance to check. Let's be clear about who we're talking about. Not someone who stumbled into financial trouble through carelessness, not someone who didn't try. You thought carefully. You made difficult trade-offs that people around you probably never even knew about. You delayed things you wanted. You read the articles. You had the conversations with yourself at 11 p.m. that nobody else was present for. And you're self-aware enough to know that tying your worth to money is a shallow thing to do. You've watched people do it. People who introduce themselves with their income, who signal their financial position in conversation like they're presenting credentials. You've always found something a little hollow in that. Which is exactly why what we're going to talk about is so difficult to catch in yourself. Because this isn't vanity, it's not ego in the obvious performative sense, it's far quieter than that. It lives in the gap between what your account says and how you feel about yourself on an otherwise ordinary afternoon. It lives in the way a strong financial month settles something in you that goes beyond practical relief, and in the way a slow month disturbs something that no amount of rational self-talk can fully settle back down. You are intelligent, genuinely. You understand that net worth is arithmetic. Assets minus liabilities, a snapshot, a number on a page. You know this the same way you know that a tension headache is almost never dangerous, and yet your body still responds as if it might be. Knowing is not the same as being free of it. That's not a flaw. That's a very specific feature of how identity operates, and once we understand it precisely, you'll start to see it everywhere. That reaction you just recognized, that is not about money. That is about identity. And the distance between those two things is costing you more than any bad investment ever could. And here's the part that makes it worse, the part this video is actually about. The more you rely on that number to feel okay, the worse you feel without it. Not better, worse. Every time the number gives you relief, it raises the floor of what you need next time. Every time it fails to deliver the feeling you were looking for, the absence cuts a little deeper than it did before. And dependency, over years, is a form of erosion, slow, invisible, running in exactly the opposite direction from the security you thought you were constructing. That is what we're here to examine. Here's what actually happened. And I want to say this carefully because it's easy to hear it wrong. At some point, probably gradually, probably without a single identifiable moment, your financial number stopped being a tool and became a verdict. Not a verdict about your balance sheet, a verdict about you, about your adequacy as an adult, about whether you are the kind of person you were supposed to become, about whether if someone could see the full picture, every number, every decision, the distance between where you are and where you imagined you'd be by now, they would still think of you the way you need them to. And once a number becomes a verdict, your brain doesn't process it as data anymore. It processes it as evidence. Every statement, every benchmark, every quietly calculated comparison, it becomes part of an ongoing case, a case that you have been both building and defending simultaneously for years. This is the betrayal, because you entered this wanting security, wanting to be responsible. You started tracking things, building habits, making a plan, because those felt like the right things to do. And somewhere inside that process, the very act of measuring became the mechanism that fused your sense of self to what the measuring revealed. The betrayal isn't that you care about money. That's rational. The betrayal is that you started caring about what money says about you. That small, nearly invisible transition, it changed everything. It changed what risks feel like. It changed what kinds of decisions even feel available to you. And here's the final piece, the one that makes the trap so effective. The sharper your mind, the better your cover story. Because intelligent people are extraordinarily good at wrapping emotional responses in rational language. I have high standards. I want to be prepared. Is taking this seriously really a problem? No, none of those things are wrong, but they can become the narrative that conceals something operating from a much older, much deeper place.
Let me walk through the mechanism precisely, not abstractly, specifically. There's a concept sometimes called self-concept threat. It describes what happens when something in our environment challenges the story we carry about who we are. When that threat fires, the mind doesn't respond calmly. It responds protectively, filtering, deflecting, seeking reassurance, often without any awareness that this is happening. When your net worth becomes part of your self-concept, every piece of financial information becomes a potential threat or a temporary reprieve. Nothing lands as a neutral data anymore. A number, a missed target, a comparison calculated silently in your own head. It doesn't arrive as a fact, it arrives as a signal about whether you are adequate, whether the story you've been telling about yourself is still holding. That signal generates an emotional state, and the behavior that follows isn't driven by the financial situation, it's driven by that emotional state, which means you're not making a money decision, you're making a self-worth management decision. They look identical from the outside, they feel identical from the inside, but they produce entirely different results over time, and they compound in entirely different directions. The behavior works, the state settles, the threat recedes, so the brain files this away. This is how we handle that feeling. The pattern becomes automatic, the automatic becomes invisible. This is what smart money sabotage examines, not the obvious financial mistakes, but the internal logic that makes the costly ones feel completely reasonable in the moment they're made. Now, here's the piece that nobody talks about, the piece that separates this from simply caring about money. The more your net worth grows, the more your self-worth becomes fragile. That runs completely counter to what you'd expect. You'd expect that as the number climbs, the anxiety would ease, that progress would purchase peace, but that's not what happens when identity is fused to the measurement. What actually happens is that the number becoming real, becoming something you can lose, raises the stakes of the emotional threat. You have more to protect, more evidence that could turn against you, more distance to fall. This is why people with objectively strong financial positions still wake at 3 a.m. with a chest full of something that shouldn't be there. This is why hitting a target produces not a rival, but a new, slightly higher target that feels equally urgent. The more you improve financially, the worse you feel about yourself when you don't. The number isn't the foundation, the number is the dependency, and dependency doesn't stabilize at a higher dose, it escalates.
Let me show you what this looks like in actual life, not in extreme cases, in ordinary weeks, in behavior that passes as completely normal, because for most people in this pattern, it is. The first place it appears is in how you relate to financial information. People whose identity is fused to their finances develop a very specific relationship with their numbers. They check frequently, not to manage, but to regulate. The checking isn't information seeking. It's more like taking a reading, a way of finding out whether things are still okay, whether the evidence is still on your side. When the reading is good, there's a moment of relief, disproportionate to the actual situation, not satisfaction with a well-managed system, something closer to permission. Permission to relax briefly until the next check. When the reading is off, or just short of the internal benchmark, there's a subtle withdrawal, not a conscious decision to avoid, just a slight increase in friction around looking. The app becomes a little harder to open. The statement sits unopened a day longer than it should, because looking at a number that might indict you requires a readiness that isn't always available. The second place it shows up is in how you communicate, or don't, about money with people close to you. There's a very particular quality of silence that surrounds finances when identity lives inside them. Not the silence of reasonable privacy. This is a protective silence. The silence of not wanting someone whose opinion matters to know where you actually stand. So conversations stay surface level. You share wins comfortably and struggles vaguely. You're generous with general advice, careful with specific details about your own situation. And there's a low, persistent tiredness that comes from maintaining that gap, from managing the space between the image and the reality, year after year. The third place it appears is in spending that isn't really about desire. There's a category of purchase that functions as identity confirmation. Things that say, primarily to yourself, not to anyone else, that you have arrived, or that you're close enough to arrived that the gap doesn't require acknowledgement right now. This isn't necessarily expensive spending. Sometimes it's just the right version of something. The car, the address, the restaurant when someone you respect is present. And none of it is dishonest. You can usually afford it. But there is a real, functionally important difference between choosing something because you genuinely want it and choosing it because it quiets a voice that keeps asking whether you're enough. When spending is doing that second job, it feels like self-expression, but it's functioning as self-defense. The fourth place it appears is in the decisions that get stalled longest. Investment decisions, major financial moves, things that require committing to a direction where the outcome is uncertain. These don't get ignored, they get circled, endlessly considered, researched past the point where more research is changing anything. Not from laziness, not from genuine confusion, from a very specific caution that is really self-protection dressed up as thoroughness. Because when identity is indexed to financial outcomes, making the wrong move isn't just a financial loss, it's evidence against the narrative. The fifth place, the one most people least expect, is in the experience of actually winning. You hit the number, the one you'd been carrying in your head for years. The savings milestone, the net worth figure that once felt like it would mean something definitive, like arriving at a place that had been waiting for you. And then you were there, and it didn't feel like it was supposed to. There was a moment, maybe a few hours, maybe a day of something like relief, and then, almost immediately, something else moved in. Not gratitude, not peace, pressure. A new, sharp awareness of how much you had to lose, a sudden vigilance about protecting what you'd built that felt more like dread than satisfaction. This is the paradox that identity-fused finances eventually produce. You work toward the number to feel better about yourself. You reach the number, and instead of feeling better, you feel more exposed, more vulnerable to the verdict reversing. The game doesn't end at the milestone. It restarts with more on the line.
The cost of living inside this pattern isn't dramatic. It doesn't arrive as a crisis. It accumulates the way everything slow and important accumulates, quietly, in the background, attributable to so many things that it never quite gets attributed to this one. The first thing that erodes over years is the range of what you'll allow yourself to attempt. Not because you stopped being capable, because every decision carrying genuine uncertainty felt too emotionally costly to take. So you chose the known path, the measurable option, the move you could defend. Not for financial reasons, for identity reasons. Because being wrong about money, when money is identity, isn't just being wrong, it's being revealed. Over 10 years, the cumulative weight of choosing defensively rather than deliberately, that's a meaningful gap, not a catastrophic one, just a quiet distance between where you are and where a slightly different version of you might have arrived. The second thing that happens is a gradual disconnection from the original reason you cared about money at all. Most people, when they trace it back honestly, wanted financial stability for something, for time, for freedom, for the ability to make choices without being held hostage by circumstances. But when the number becomes the identity, accumulating the number becomes the actual goal, not the thing the number was supposed to make possible. The marker keeps moving. Enough is always slightly more than what you currently have, and what you currently have is always somehow not quite there. There's a specific exhaustion that builds from this, not burnout, not a crisis, a dull, persistent awareness that you've been working very hard at something that doesn't resolve. Stop here for a moment. Think about the last time you felt genuinely at ease with your financial situation. Not proud of it, not temporarily relieved by a good number, genuinely at ease, in a way that had nothing to perform and nothing to defend. For some people, there's a specific memory. For others, it's hard to locate. Maybe it was before you knew enough to measure, before the numbers were real enough to carry weight. That distance between the measuring and the ease is worth sitting with before we continue. The third cost is in your relationship with yourself. When your financial number is woven into your self-concept, you stop being a person who has finances. Gradually, subtly, without deciding to, you become a person who is their finances. The inner conversation about money stops being something you're having and starts being something you're living inside of. And that changes how you treat yourself when things don't go as planned. A missed target isn't a miss, it's a verdict. A setback isn't a setback, it's evidence. The internal response to evidence against yourself is almost never constructive. It's a mixture of shame, defensiveness, and redoubled effort coming from entirely the wrong source. You push harder, not because harder is the right response, because pushing is how you override the verdict, because staying in motion is how you avoid sitting still long enough to feel what the number is currently saying. And the quietly devastating thing about this pattern is that it persists regardless of what the number actually is. Because when the underlying question is, am I adequate? Financial progress doesn't answer it. It quiets it, temporarily, until the question returns. The question always returns, because it was never actually a financial question. I want to offer you a few statements. Not a quiz, not a framework, just mirrors. Hear each one and notice what happens in you, not whether you agree, just what happens. When your financial situation is going well, you feel better about yourself as a person, not just more secure, better, more like who you're supposed to be. When someone you know achieves a visible milestone, you feel something before you feel happy for them. You have a number, a net worth, an income figure, a savings target, and reaching it feels like it would mean something beyond the money itself, like arriving somewhere. There are parts of your financial picture you haven't looked at closely in months, Not because you're irresponsible, because looking feels like more than you have capacity for right now. You have worked hard, made careful choices, built something real, and you still carry a persistent, low-level sense of being behind. Not behind a specific person, not behind a specific target, just behind. You don't need to score yourself. There's no threshold here. But if 2 or 3 of those landed somewhere in your chest rather than just your mind, that's the mechanism. Identity and financial measurement fused together, running decisions that feel completely logical from the inside. Here is what changes when you can actually see this clearly. Not resolve it, not fix it, just see it with precision. The pattern doesn't disappear the moment you recognize it, but it becomes observable. And observable is a completely different relationship than invisible. When you notice yourself reaching for an account balance in a moment of emotional unease, not to budget, not to plan, but to check whether you're still okay, you can see that for what it is, not financial diligence, emotional regulation using a financial object. Those are different things. Naming the difference doesn't stop the behavior immediately, but it removes the disguise. When the familiar tightening comes at someone else's financial news, you can recognize it as an identity signal rather than a financial emergency. You can hold it differently, let it pass through rather than absorbing it as information about your own adequacy. When you find yourself circling a decision, gathering information past the point where it's changing your analysis, finding reasons to wait that keep multiplying, you can ask a different question. Not what's the right move, but what am I afraid this decision will say about me if it doesn't work? The fusion happened for a reason. At some point, measuring yourself by external, trackable markers felt safer than trusting something less visible. Numbers update in real time. They feel like proof, like progress you can show. The problem was never that you took money seriously. The problem is that money became a proxy for something that money is genuinely not equipped to measure. And every time you reach for the number hoping to feel okay, not to plan, not to manage, but to feel okay, you reinforce the idea that the number is the answer. It isn't. And knowing that is only the beginning of a much longer process. Because knowing and living differently are separated by a very real distance that very few people talk about honestly. You clicked on a title that recognized something in you. Your net worth is killing your self-worth. Not as a provocation, as a description, as something that has been quietly operating in the background of a life that from the outside looks entirely together. A life with real effort behind it, real sacrifice, real intelligence applied to real decisions. The goal of this wasn't to hand you something to do, it was to help you see something that has always been there, just below the surface of the rational explanations you've been offering yourself for years. The decisions that cost us most are never the ones that feel like mistakes. They feel like logic. They feel like caution. They feel like being the kind of person who takes this seriously. They feel that way because they are shaped by something with its own logic, an older logic, one that learned to use financial measurement as a way to answer questions that financial measurement was never designed to answer. If your self-worth rises and falls with a number, then no number will ever be enough. Not a bigger number, not the right number, not the number you've been working toward, none of them. Because the problem was never the size of the number. The problem is that the number was assigned a job it cannot do, and a tool given the wrong job doesn't fail less when you upgrade it. It fails the same way, at a higher cost, with more invested in the outcome. Notice as you go about the rest of your day, notice the next time a number gives you a feeling, not information, a feeling about whether you are okay,
about whether you were the person you were supposed to become. Just notice it, without judgment, without trying to fix it. That noticing is where something real begins.